Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce Redneck Radio Man. Joining me today is Frank Joseph, who has done a ton of work in the research of Old World visitors into the America that influenced America long before the days of Christopher Columbus. And there's been a ton of research done in this area that not everybody's aware of, that really pretty much only the people that are interested in researching this particular field would really know a lot about. And there's a lot of very interesting things that a lot of people would probably never know if they didn't check into this. And he's also got a crystal skull event coming up real soon in the near future. So today we're going to talk about his most recent book, The Lost Worlds of Ancient America. And then we're going to also talk a little bit about his crystal skull event, which is a conference he'll be holding in the very near future. And I've got links to both of them posted in the show description right underneath his picture. And if you scroll down to the bottom of the description, you'll see a book cover with going to Amazon.com, where all you got to do is click on it if you're interested in getting this book. And this will be made available in my archives tomorrow, the next day, as soon as I can get the pictures added to the video part of it. And I'd also like to encourage everybody to call in if you have any questions. The number is 832-632-7904. And if I don't answer right away, I'm probably just waiting for a break in the conversation in order to, get to the telephone line. If a voicemail picks up first, just hang up and call right back, and I'll answer it. So, Frank, I believe this is like your second or third time on my show. If memory serves, I might be a little off on that. How are you doing today?
Well, just fine, Royce. Yeah, we've spoken before. I'm very grateful for the opportunity.
Well, I was grateful to have you back, and I got to tell you, when I was reading your book, it really caught my interest, and I noticed what you've really done in this book is this is a kind of like an anthology, you might say, of works from many different people, many researchers in this area, and the things that they have found that I think you culled from your Ancient American magazine. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm quite excited about the Lost Worlds of Ancient America. I had an opportunity to go back over hundreds of issues of our magazine, which was first published in 1993. And Ancient American is the only periodical that I'm aware of that actually investigates on a regular basis. It comes out every 2 months. It's a bi-monthly magazine. It investigates evidence for visitors from other parts of the world to the Americas hundreds and thousands of years before Columbus arrived in 1492. And our articles that we've collected, many hundreds of them now, some of them are written by university-trained professionals, but a lot of them come from just ordinary people who have found very bizarre things on their property. And they're sharing this information with the public in a kind of an interesting forum. So what I did for this book is I went over what I felt were the most credible articles, the most convincing articles that offered physical proof for visitors from overseas in the Americas. And it comes to a collection of about 40 different authors, and some of them, like Lee Pennington, for example, who examines the large amount of Roman coins that have been found in the American Midwest. He is a Pulitzer Prize nominee, and so we're talking with some pretty high-credential people here. Another gentleman who wrote about these canals that have been found, huge canal network, irrigation network in Bolivia. He is a former photographic reconnaissance officer with the Royal Air Force from England. Brian Allen is his name. James Allen is his name. And so we've got some pretty high-powered people on board.
Yeah, I was noticing that when I was reading it and checking all the authors of it, or of these different articles. Now, one of the things I wanted to, bring out into the open at the very beginning was that you've mentioned in your book, or you've given me the impression that there is a sort of an embargo of historical information going on among mainstream academia in the archaeological field. Can you kind of give us a little, idea of why such a embargo was? When that might be the wrong term, you can correct me, but why something like this would be going on?
Well, I think that's a very excellent term, Royce, and I'm going to use that in the future. There's indeed an embargo. The truth about discoveries that took place, several discoveries of the Americas, quite a few long before Columbus. And why is there this kind of a resistance? That's a very interesting question I get asked a lot. How is it possible that professional archaeologists would want to cover up this information? Aren't they interested in the American past? No, they're not. As it turns out, American archaeologists have had a rule, a tenet set down for them, a piece of doctrine that was instituted around the turn of the 20th century by a man whose name was John Wesley Powell. And John Wesley Powell is regarded as the founder of American archaeology. He brought scientific discipline to this science, which was really not that scientific until then. It was known as the work of antiquarians, people who were interested in the past. And he did some great work. John Wesley Powell is a very important man. However, in laying down these rules, one of them is completely unscientific and very detrimental to understanding American prehistory. He ordained that any information, any physical evidence which is presented to indicate visitors to America before Columbus must be dismissed and not considered. That such evidence is either fake, given out of hand, ipso facto, it's either fake or a misinterpretation of the evidence. And when that rule was laid down, archaeologists ever since that time have abided by that doctrine. They simply are not interested in anything that suggests an overseas influence from say Europe or Africa or the Orient. And this sort of a fossilized point of view has crippled archaeology. And as a consequence, the American people and students especially who go to university or colleges are totally unaware of the four major civilizations that rose and fell in North America long before Columbus, hundreds and thousands of years before Spain even came into existence, modern Spain. They're also unaware of these extremely important contacts from Rome that took place, or from the Celtic people that came here. But this point of view is being eroded. This embargo that you mentioned is being dismantled, not by myself and people who write books about it, but by other hard sciences, especially geology. And the geologists like Scott Walter, who we can talk about later on, have been able to absolutely, unquestionably identify certain artifacts as belonging to people that arrived here long before Columbus. Another hard science that's developing, of course, is genetics and the use of DNA. And the DNA studies that have been done of Native Americans have shown, for example, that the Cherokee Indians of eastern Tennessee have a direct genetic link to the people of ancient Israel, the hills of Gehenna. The Algonquian tribes in the American Northwest have a pre-Columbian genetic link to Ireland, South England, especially Wales, the coast of France and Portugal, all through the Celtic peoples that arrived here 3,000 years ago. So these are hard sciences that are changing this old point of view.
Well, I think it's just great you got around to that DNA thing, because one of the questions in the chat room was, what DNA genetic evidence do we have of pre-Columbus visitors, such as the Egyptians and Romans? Which you covered the Israelites, but was there also some evidence of the Egyptians and Romans that was DNA?
Well, the Egyptian evidence for the DNA has not been found. However, there is extremely persuasive evidence, physical evidence, that the Egyptians had an important trade going on with South America. Now, when we have our text, of course, it's called The Lost Worlds of Ancient America. It doesn't refer only to the United States. We discuss all of the Americas, from Alaska down to Tierra del Fuego. And as far as the Egyptians are concerned, about 20 years ago, archaeologists who were trying to preserve a collection of mummies in the Cairo Museum noticed that there were indications of cocaine residue and tobacco residue in some of the mummies. They figured that this was impossible. How could this happen? Because cocaine not only has never been grown in Egypt or anywhere in Africa, but cocaine is grown in very few areas, really, of Peru, Colombia, and Ecuador. It only grows there. As the conservators were looking at more evidence of this cocaine residue, they found that this cocaine was obtained from literally hundreds of mummies, hundreds. Some of the mummies went back many thousands of years to some of the earliest dynasties, going back to about 2800 BC. And there was no explanation for it. This can only mean that the ancient Egyptians came to South America for cocaine, which they used not as a recreational drug, but as part of their medical practices. We know the ancient Egyptians were very fine physicians, and also the indications of cocaine in the number of mummies who appear to have been high priests indicates that cocaine was used for an altered state of consciousness in some of their religious rituals, it would appear. Now, as far as the Egyptians having the maritime ability, the ships necessary to cross, there is no doubt about that, because around 1950, when work was being done on the Great Pyramid, again a preservation effort, a grave was found, a very large grave. And inside this grave was not a human being, but a ship, a vessel, a sailing vessel, about 100 feet long, and it was in perfect condition. It had been dismantled, but was in perfect condition. When this ship was reassembled painstakingly over about 15 years, it was revealed that this ship was not made to sail up and down the Nile River, but it was made as an ocean-going vessel. Its planks were sewn together with hemp. That means that when the ship was put in the water, the hemp expanded and created an extremely tight but very flexible bond. This is a kind of technology somewhat similar to what the Vikings had, who had, of course, ocean-going ships. So we know for a fact, two facts, that the ancient Egyptians were in the cocaine trade with South America, and we know that they had the vessels to do so. So even though we don't have the DNA yet that shows the Egyptians were in South America, this evidence is clear. That shows that they were definitely over here for a very specific purpose.
Exactly. And, the thing that comes to my mind as a question on that is, why would such an item as a ship, an ocean-going ship, placed in a tomb that far away from the ocean?
Well, I can give you some good speculation on that seems credible. The Great Pyramid is, of course, also a great mystery. And why would somebody go to the trouble of making this huge tomb just to put in this vessel? We know that there was a myth associated with the building of the Great Pyramid, a myth, a kind of a historic or an oral tradition that was preserved by an Egyptian historian about 2,300 years ago. His name was Manetho. And you can go online today and you can pick up some of his material. It still is preserved. And Manetho tells the story of the founding of ancient Egypt. He says that Manetho says that there was a group of people who called themselves the Followers of Horus. Horus was a sky god. And the followers of Horus. In Egyptian, the name is the Semsu-Her. The Semsu-Her, or the followers of Horus, are described by Manetho as arriving at the Nile Delta in a fleet of great ships. And until they arrived, Egypt was inhabited by a rather primitive people who had no trace of civilization. They were primitive farmers and fishermen.
Sounds like the Kimbertons.
When the Semsu-Her, or the followers of Horus, arrived, they brought with them already the tenets of a very high civilization. They had the technology to do so, and the Semsu-Her are associated with the building of the Great Pyramid. The pyramid was supposedly built as a political act in which the Semsu-Her, these refugees from a high civilization that had been destroyed far outside of Egypt, arrived in the Nile Delta, wanted to settle there, but they had a native population to deal with. So by building this Great Pyramid, they used the local people as laborers, whereas the Semsu-Her used their technology as architects. And as a combination of their high technology and the physical labor of the local people that created this political act of unification. This is the story that's in Manetho. Now those ships that are buried, by the way, there's not one ship, there are 5 that are buried around the Great Pyramid. Only one is open to the public. And it is assumed that these ships belonged to the Semsu-Her, the followers of Horus, and that is why they're buried at the Great Pyramid, because this was their first and most important act to create a unified Egypt. The Semsu-Her themselves are described as people coming from a high civilization that was on an island far out into the Atlantic Ocean. And it's referred to in the Egyptian records, especially the Book of the Dead, as Etalenti. And it was from this Etalenti that Plato got the story of Atlantis, which is a Greek variation of the original Greek Etalenti. So it's a very interesting story, but very well documented, and it's something that mainstream archaeologists just do not discuss.
You know, you was mentioning 5 of those ships. It seems to me like I read there was also a ship half buried under the sand not far from the Temple of Abydos. Would that be one of them by any chance?
That is totally new to me, Royce. I don't know. It's completely possible. I'm not aware of a ship tomb by Abydos, but that's something I need to look into. It wasn't
a tomb. It was just and actually the word a ship wasn't used. The word boat was, and it was buried in the sand, so that may be something different.
Oh, Well, that's great. I'll have to check into that. I don't know about that.
It seems like I saw it online. I seem to have a memory of that. I look up so many articles, it's so hard to remember where you find them all at.
Right. That's why you have to take notes. But I will definitely check into that.
Okay, now, also, we got a question in the chat room about when did the Semsu-Her arrive in Egypt?
They appear to have arrived at the end of the 4th millennium BC. This is around 3100 BC. The Semsu-Her, or the followers of Horus, created 2 different kingdoms, Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. And it was around 3100 BC that a great pharaoh, the very first of the pharaohs, his name was Horus, or Pharaoh Her, united both of these different kingdoms, and that created the modern Egyptian, or rather the ancient Egyptian state. And the very first king of the state, his son was Narmer. Narmer is still, his memory is preserved in a tablet, which is in perfect condition. It's called the Narmer Palette, and it shows him uniting both the southern and northern halves, upper and lower Nile. So the Semsu-Her arrived at the end of the 4th millennium BC, about maybe 33 or 3200, maybe 3100 BC, something like that. And that's an interesting date, because at that time, 3100 BC, geophysicists, dendrochronologists, archaeoastronomers have come to a consensus that there was a major catastrophe, a a natural disaster that took place when a comet made a very close pass to the Earth. This is known as Comet Encke. It's named after Wilhelm Encke, the Swiss astronomer who discovered it. This is a comet that was a very large and dangerous one, made a close pass to the Earth, and made a barrage, as it were, of a meteoritic material that collided with the Earth and caused human disruption, a lot of migrations at that time. So 3100 BC is a very interesting event horizon. And those of our listeners who are unfamiliar with this event or are not sure that I'm telling the truth should really just go into Google and or Wikipedia and put in the date 3100 BC, and they will see that it was a very rough time for the Northern Hemisphere at that time.
Yeah, there was a lot of rough times back in those days. Well, actually, that's been kind of off and on, for many a millennia now. Well, I say millennia, but, for a long time. But what I was going to ask you also now is in the book, you tell us about some early 6th century tablets found in Michigan that some members of academia at the time claimed that these tablets were fakes. Can you tell us why they were suspected of being fakes?
That's a really interesting discovery. The early pioneers who crossed over Michigan in the early 19th century, they're about 1810, 1815, something like that, were, of course, mostly farmers and settlers. And they came across literally hundreds of what they called Indian mounds. These were just heaps of earth, and they were thought to be burial mounds. But in a number of these mounds, as the farmers cleared them for their land, they found tablets, slate black tablets, beautifully made, beveled, and on these tablets they're covered with a kind of a script, an unknown written language. Well, the Native Americans were not known to use a written language, but beyond that there were illustrations on these black slate tablets that seemed to indicate biblical scenes, especially Noah's flood. There are representations, rather arcane, strange representations of Jesus and the crucifixion, Christian and proto-Christian symbolism, but then there are also representations that would appear to have Jesus having a brother, very strange interpretations of Christianity. And between 1840, we know that's the earliest time that these tablets were found, 1840 and 1911, which is quite a spread of time, more than 3,000 of these tablets were found. And they're all basically the same. They're covered with an unidentifiable script of some kind and these mostly biblical scenes. Some of them are rather crudely done, and others are beautifully done. I know, I've seen hundreds myself. There was a museum in Utah that displayed these tablets. When that museum gave up their collection, they went to the University of Michigan, where they're now on display. Some of them are on display. Others are in private collections. The most beautiful that I've seen so far are in private collections, extremely well made, some of them. But the sheer magnitude of this discovery from 1840 to 1911, and over 3,000 documented, indicates that something is going on. So the early archaeologists, when they saw them, they figured, oh, these are fake. The Native Americans didn't have any conception of Christianity before the first pioneers arrived, and they had no ability to make a written language and so on. But as this criticism was going on, more of these tablets were still being found, and so some scientists, what they called antiquarians in those days, gathered together notary republics, and affidavits, legal affidavits, were sworn out on literally dozens of people who testified that they found these tablets under pristine conditions, that they did not fake them. These were documents of law, and we have copies of those affidavits that were sworn out. So what do these tablets mean? Number one, are they authentic? Absolutely. Are there some fakes involved in some of it? Very probably. Throughout the entire archaeological community, fakes have always been made. It's human nature. If you go to a museum today, you can be sure that some of the artifacts you're looking at that are portrayed as real are fake. There are some swindlers out there. But the majority of these Michigan tablets, as they're referred to, are authentic. And the article that we have in there is by David Allen Deal, who before his passing about 3 or 4 years ago was quite a long-term expert, a lifelong expert in interpretation of these Michigan tablets. What we believe and what David Allen Deal was able to show, I think, very conclusively in his wonderful article in The Lost Worlds of Ancient America, is that these tablets were made by a Christian sect known as the Copts, C-O-P-T-S. The Copts were a Christian sect that were demonized by Roman Catholics. They were known as Gnostic Christians. They believed in a form of Christianity that was somewhat different than the mainstream or conventional Christianity that came to dominate the Vatican. And the Copts, we know historically, you can look them up online, they're on encyclopedias everywhere. The Copts were so marginalized by the forces of the Vatican that they were literally exterminated. They were liquidated. They were put to the sword. And we know that a Coptic community escaped somewhere. Have no idea what became of them.
Right.
It's conceivable that this Coptic community came to Michigan, and that apparently that's what's being shown on these tablets. Some of the tablets show confrontations between what appear to be people from the Near East, and the Copts were associated with Egypt, confrontations between people from the Near East or possibly Europe with Native Americans, and it shows dead on either side. Some of the tablets also show cooperation between these foreign visitors and Native Americans. This fits in perfectly with Native American tradition, interestingly enough. A number of Native American tribes discuss East Star Man. East Star Man is the pre-modern version of Christ. A number of early pioneers were shocked at the knowledge that several Native American tribes, including the Cherokee, by the way, had of the Bible and of Christianity before there was any modern contacts. They didn't refer to this beneficent man as Jesus, which is, of course, an old world term. They referred to him as East Star Man because he came from the East. He was a great man of peace who had suffered persecution across the sea and spread the doctrine of cooperation and humanity. And he was greatly revered. This is their story. Now, whether this was actually Jesus that came here or was a missionary of some kind, nobody knows. But the Native Americans, there's no doubt that many Native American tribes were quite well versed in early versions of Christianity.
Wow.
And what's really, really interesting is that some of the Native American versions talk about their Jesus figure, East Star Man, as having a brother, as portrayed on these Michigan tablets. So it's a very interesting story, and I just wish that I could show our audience some of these beautifully carved Michigan tablets. Obviously, they're not fake. I mean, a fraudulent person would not go to so much trouble to have made over 3,000 of these tablets, and some of them are very beautifully wrought.
You can mug somebody a lot easier if you just want a quick dollar.
I don't think you get a quick dollar. I mean, you could sell.
Well,
these
that's what
things
I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And we have why go to all that work when you could just mug somebody and get your money quick? I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Well, exactly. The type of mentality that would want to fake things, they're not going to do anywhere near a good job. We have a photograph of one of them on page 57, and it's a good photograph. It's clear and it shows how beautifully made it is. But boy, seeing it originally, and I saw this, it's this dark blue slate. It's really a kind of a masterpiece. By the way, you know, nobody made any money off of this. I don't know anybody that became rich off of peddling these slate tablets. they were mostly just collected by farmers and kept in their families or given to the authorities for study. I don't know a single person that retired off of selling these things. The picture that we have on page 57 is, I'm looking at it now, it's quite remarkable. It's not something that a fraudulent person would just knock out.
Yeah, and this ain't the only picture you have. It's only when you have these particular tablets in there. But, I mean, you got pictures throughout the whole entire book is what I'm saying, of different things that y'all are talking about in the book. One of the things I did want to ask you, though, is there a substantial profit to be made selling fake artifacts from old world countries in America to make it worth any hoaxer's effort to do that?
No, and never. There's never been any. There are some people that have faked things up, made a few bucks, but in the whole history of archaeology that goes back about 150 years, there's not been a single person that's cashed in on this. And the vast majority, Royce, of these artifacts that are found are usually found, like I say, by farmers who share them with archaeologists and don't ask any money for them. That in itself, that's a great question you asked. Because if these things are all fake, well, where are the people making big bucks off of this?
Really? Because, that's what I wanted to ask you for. You know, if academia was so quick in the beginning to say some of this stuff is fake, why would they think that if there's no profit to be made doing it?
Well, you know where the big money is in fakes, interestingly enough? It's in conventional artifacts. It's where somebody will go to the trouble, especially in Europe and in Italy. They have some very excellent artisans that make reproductions of Egyptian statues or Mayan statues, and they try to palm them off as having been found in a real Mayan site or an Egyptian site. They don't say, oh, this is an example of the Egyptians in America. That never happens. They try to palm them off to the establishment archaeologists as being authentic Egyptian artifacts within the context of Egyptian prehistory or ancient history, dynastic history. And they get stung a lot of times. So I think that's what makes them very skittish on this. But when it comes to finding artifacts that are out of place, like an Egyptian artifact that's found in Peru or something, there's no fraud involved in that because mainstream archaeologists don't accept it. So the fraud is entirely on the mainstream or conventional side, interestingly enough.
Sounds pretty silly on their side, if you ask me. And
they're very sensitive. They're oversensitive because they've been stung by buying too many artifacts. There was a big scandal, matter of fact, in the Metropolitan Museum of New York, which is a very fabulous place in which a number of vases that they had on display for decades turned out to be all fake. But there was big money involved there. Big money. With those fakes, there's no money at all involved in the Michigan tablets. Nothing. So that lends credibility to them in my book.
Oh, yeah. And I'm looking at that picture on page 57 you was mentioning. And again, I'm not an expert in this, but what I am seeing, just as a novice that does a lot of research in ancient mythology, is that there's a lot of iconography into this, a lot of detail, and a lot of symbology that no average person knows without doing a lot of study to be putting into this thing to begin with.
You're absolutely right. I mean, whoever put this slate together, their knowledge of symbolism, as you say, and the beautiful graphics involved at the bottom, especially that temple, I guess, that's being shown. I mean, somebody that has that kind of ability, would they be involved in faking stuff? Imagine how long it took just to make that one. And you look at that one tablet, and now think that there are about another 3,000 of those that are known.
Yeah, that'd be a lot of work and a lot of study, and, there's way too much there to, for such a claim, but like the academics thought at first for that to be a hunt.
Just as a fake, yeah.
Yeah.
That symbol at the very center is really interesting. It's referred to as the mystic symbol. It is, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different, they look like nails. And this symbol, referred to as the mystic symbol, is found on a great many of these Michigan tablets, maybe most of them. And David Allen Deal spent just years trying to crack that symbol. And he finally was able to do it. It is a Paleo-Hebrew word. Yes, it's a word. It is a word. It's a term. It's a name. And he's able to show in his wonderful article exactly what that means. It means literally Yahweh. It's the symbol for the Hebrew God. And it's such an obscure symbol that a faker would have to be a very great scholar, spend a long time. This is not something that everybody recognizes. It took David Adam Deal, I think, like 15 or 18 years to crack what that means. So it's not something that anybody would recognize right away. But that symbol at the center of the circle, the concentric circles, it's the symbol of the Hebrew God Yahweh. It actually reads that. Each one of those nail-like figures represents a letter, and it's pronounced Yahweh. So I think that that alone signifies that these are authentic, and it represents a Christian community that arrived in Michigan about 500 A.D.
Probably.
500, about 1,000 years.
The Vatican.
This means that there was a pre-Christian, unconventional Christian community that arrived in Michigan about 1,000 years before Columbus. And you figure it this way: if these Coptic Christians were being literally slaughtered by mainstream Christians, I mean, put to the sword, you're going to take a chance in crossing the ocean. And probably a number of them were lost crossing, but some of them made it. And what they did is they traveled up the St. Lawrence Seaway, which in those days, by the way, was totally navigable. 1,000 years before Columbus, 500 A.D., we know that the St. Lawrence Seaway, you could take a canoe from the mouth of the St. Lawrence Seaway directly into the Great Lakes. You couldn't do that several hundred years later because there were major shifts going on in the waterways, the riverways of North America. But in 500 A.D., you could have done it. And I think what happened was that the Coptic Christians were faced with either being killed off, literally put to the sword, or else fleeing. They became boat people, modern-day boat people, and they arrived here. I think it's clear. But I mean, this is an important find. Here we're talking about a large Christian community concentrated in the state of Michigan, and the physical evidence is overwhelming, and yet the mainstream archaeologists pay it no attention. And that's why we had to include this article in our book. I think it's something people need to know about and think. You know, as you read the book, you can see that we don't try to convince anybody of anything. That we put the evidence out there and let the reader decide for himself or herself.
Right.
We're not interested in trying to convert anybody to our opinions. You know, it's not a religious thing in that regard. But it's information that needs to be pondered and considered. These are all very brief articles, and if people are interested, they can follow some of the sources that we have listed in the back. We have abundant footnotes and bibliographies that can lead people to more information about these wonderful discoveries.
Okay. Well, listen, our time's going to start winding down, so I want to move on to the, crystal skull thing here in a minute. Mm-hmm. But before we do, I got one more question from the chat room I don't want to miss. Does Frank Joseph have any confidence about a single, unified world civilization in the past?
Yes, I do. The Greeks believed in something called an ecumeny. You may have heard something like that term, like ecumenical council, that is in the Catholic Church today. The Greek word ecumeny means a world culture. The Greeks believed that there was a golden age long before themselves in which this ecumeny, or a world culture, unified the world. And there is evidence that there were several ecumenies. And the earliest one, I believe, took place immediately after the Ice Age. And this is something that we go into in another book. But you may have heard about the megalith builders. These were the people that built places like Stonehenge and these great stones that were oriented to various astronomical phenomena. In my next book, which comes out next year, it's called Before Atlantis, I trace these megalithic structures that are all very similar, obviously made by the same people, and you can trace these megalithic structures by the tens of thousands around the world. They encircle the world. Stonehenge-type structures have been found in the United States, in Japan, in Indonesia, in Borneo, across the Near East, through Africa, and I have quite a few photographs of them, and I trace this. So I think that there was a unified culture a very long time ago that began probably about 8,000 years before Christ. We're talking about 10,000 years ago. That's just an astounding thing to say, but the evidence, I think, is very strong. And that this was a peaceful ecumeny. It was not a warlike society. It was kind of a religious idea, worshiping the sun and the moon through the orientation of these great stone monuments that you find around the world. And I think these stone monuments that still exist are the remnants of this world culture.
Okay, now that was interesting. I hadn't, heard that particular angle on it, but, I have read before that, Christianity was really, a religion way back, thousands of years before the actual time of Christ. Perhaps not named that, but the actual idea was the worship of the spirit or the consciousness that Christ embodied later on, in other words, so to speak.
That's absolutely correct. I think that there's always been this human impetus towards Christian-like religion or spirituality that became concentrated in Jesus. Yes, I think that's correct.
Okay. Now, to move on to your, we'll come back to the book questions if I don't run out of time. If we do, we can always, have another future show sometime. But coming to the actual conference, while we still got time for that, you want to tell us about this conference? If I understand correctly, it's going to be on December 12th, 2012?
Right. In December, the 12th and the 13th, there's going to be, it's not really a conference so much as that it's a number of presenters, I guess you can call it a conference, that's going to take place in Miami, Florida. The details for it are still being put together. There's going to be at the Miami Historical Museum, which is a wonderful museum. There's going to be presenters who are experts in the crystal skulls. That's plural now, skulls that have been found in Mexico and in South America. Some of these skulls, they're questionable. Others seem to be authentic. And it'll be my pleasure to be able to give a presentation there. For anybody that's interested in this event that's coming up, they have to go to a website right now because it is still being put together. And it's www.crystalskullsevent.com. And it involves also a cruise that takes place after the presentations at the Miami Historical Museum. There'll be, I think, 2 or 3 presentations there, 2 or 3 days of presentations there. There's going to be a cruise that will leave from Miami to the island of Cozumel, off the coast of Mexico. And that's important because Cozumel is associated with the crystal skull. It was on the island of Cozumel that the ancient Maya worshipped the goddess Ixchel, Ixchel. And she was a very wonderful conception, and she's still worshipped, as a matter of fact, in Mexico and elsewhere. Ixchel is referred to as the White Lady. She and her husband, this is now in Maya historical tradition, she and her husband Itzamna lived on a magnificent island in the Atlantic Ocean. This is their story now. I'm not making this up.
Okay.
Their story goes that Ixchel and her husband Itzamna lived on this beautiful island in the Atlantic Ocean, and it was a place of very great learning, high learning, and that one day this island suffered a natural catastrophe and sank into the sea, and that she escaped with her husband to the coast of Yucatan. And there her image is still portrayed as this lady with a a jar of water which she's turning upside down, and water is running out of it to symbolize the flood that destroyed her homeland. And when she arrived, she and her husband still had all the high technology of this former land, which was referred to by a number of names. And they shared this high technology with the native peoples, and the results of the synthesis of local people and the high technology was Maya civilization. This is their story now. You can read it in a wonderful book called the Book of Counsel, or the Popol Vuh. And Ixchel was the goddess of weaving. She was the goddess of childbirth. And she was also the goddess of psychic intuition. And her symbol is the crystal skull. And the reason why she's symbolized by the crystal skull is because that's in her myth, the crystal skull signifies the moon. Her myth says that she was beheaded. She got beheaded, and her head, as it flew through the heavens, lost all its flesh and turned into a skull, and then transformed itself into the moon. So Ixchel and the crystal skull are associated with lunar magic, as it were, which is the night side of human activity, the psychic intuition. And it is at the island of Cozumel that her temple still exists, and you can go, and that we're going to be going and visiting her temple, which is open to the public. It's a very interesting place, rather unusual for a Maya temple. It has these very round columns that are on top of a grand staircase. Very interesting. And so that's what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, and I noticed you got a bunch of speakers at this event. You got, I had that right in front of me. Let me come back to it. And I may pronounce some of these wrong, and if I do, please forgive me. Looks like Jap Van Itten, and he's going to be the Master of Ceremonies. I see you're going to be speaking there, and you're the expert on Atlantis. Raymond Tarpey, who is also a member of the R, started by Edgar Casey. And Stephen Myler. Now, I know Stephen. He's been on my show a couple of times. And I know he's a real strong Egyptologist. He's been researching it for years. And he's actually got one of the natives around the pyramid area there that has family ties to one of the watchers or something to that effect. I'd have to go back and re-listen to my show. But
you got it right. That's correct. You're right.
Yeah, he's got an inside track to the history of the pyramids, in other words. So he knows the kind of stuff that most of us don't know.
You're right, Royce. Stephen Mailer is a very brilliant man, and he's a leading Egyptologist who's worked long and hard at the Great Pyramid and other temples in Egypt. And so we're very lucky to have him on board, literally, and we're looking forward to his presentation especially.
Yeah, he's been a fantastic guest for me. Matter of fact, I'm looking forward to having him back. And also, and I hope you don't mind me plugging for him, but I'm going to let my listeners remind him real quick, like for the ones that have forgotten because he ain't been on in a while, that he does do Egyptian tours. I want to say once a year, but it may not be that often.
I don't know. I'm not familiar with his tour business, but I know that any presentation he makes has got to be worthwhile.
Oh, yeah. Now, there's also a Wawa Hoshi Kavan, and she's a crystal sound musician. And there's Michelle Nocerino.
Oh, yes, yeah. She's a very brilliant woman also. She, her husband, Nick Nocerino, had the largest collection of crystal skulls in the world, and I think that collection passed to her. So she is very knowledgeable on the crystal skulls, and she's also very critical because she knows that there are a number of fakes that are out there. There are quite a few, or not just fakes, but people that I think that are mistaking not very old crystal skulls for something that are more ancient. So she's quite knowledgeable, and I hope that she brings part of her collection. I'm sure she will bring part of her collection along to Miami in December.
Yeah, I've heard about some of these fake skulls out there, and what I've actually heard, and again, this is rumor, is that some of these newer skulls that have been made, that although they're not the original ancient ones that are a part of the original, say, 13, they do have their own set of characteristics or abilities that's granted to them just by the fact that they're made out of quartz.
I think that's correct. If you can take modern quartz today and configure it any way you want, and it does have strange qualities. The ancient, not ancient, but the old radio sets, the crystal sets, were made to work that way, where you would turn on the radio in the 1920s, and the first dial you turned was actually a vice, and that vice would squeeze a little crystal inside, and when that crystal was squeezed, a little electronic spark would emit, and that would turn the radio on. That's known as piezoelectricity. You can take a piece of quartz crystal between the pliers if you want, and if you squeeze it slowly enough, you'll see a little light that will begin to emit. And that's the nature of the quartz crystal, which is able to have electronic qualities. Silicon Valley, for gosh sake, is made up entirely of the quartz crystal electronic technology. So I agree with you. I think that if you took a modern piece of crystal and carved it like a skull, it would still have some kind of interesting qualities.
And I see you're
the crystal skull that was found. That the most outstanding of them all is the Anna Mitchell-Hedges crystal skull. That was very famous.
I heard about that one.
Oh, it's a beautiful, masterpiece. It's an incredible work of art. I've had the privilege of being with it several times and seeing it and photographing it. It's just a huge work of art, and yet it's modern. I won't call it a fake. It was believed to be found in Belize amongst some ancient Mayan ruins. That is completely incorrect. Others have associated it with Atlantis and so forth, and none of that pans out. The most modern testing that was done on it in 2007 showed modern tool marks. So the crystal skull was made between 1890 and, say, 1910. But the mystery hasn't ended, because who on earth at that time could have produced such an incredibly beautiful masterpiece? It is, as it stands by itself, it's a very powerful work of art. Not only that, but the crystal skull is an actual replication of a real human skull, of a woman's skull. There was a forensic reconstruction done of the skull in the 1980s, and it shows the face of a Maya woman.
Wow.
So who on earth would have, in only a little more than 100 years ago, why would anybody have gone to the immense trouble of creating this beautiful work of art of a skull of a Native American woman? Nobody knows who made it or why. So the mystery has, if anything, increased since it's been found out that it's not ancient.
Well, it's interesting you mentioning that, because I know there's also the story that there's supposedly 13 Mayan crystal skulls that, once placed inside of a circle, will emit information that was from the past, that was put in them psychically, that will have bearing on a calamity coming up in the near future around the 2012 Maya calendar thing.
That is completely that's a modern fabrication.
Yeah,
that's a totally modern fabrication. That there's no story like that from the Maya whatsoever. If there is, I haven't. No, there is. I will say pretty confidently that is a completely modern makeup, and that there's no tradition, there's no story amongst the Maya or the Aztec or any Mesoamerican people about 13 skulls going to talk about giving information for December 21st, 2012. There's nothing like that whatsoever. This is not to say, though, that the crystal skull didn't figure into the thinking of the Maya, because, as I said, Ixchel, their most important goddess, is associated with the crystal skull. The Aztecs had their version. They called her Coyolxauhqui, and she also has it. She is the crystal skull. If you go to the Aztec calendar stone, you'll see one of the day signs. It's not Mazotl. I forgot the name of it, but it is symbolized by, I'm looking at a representation of it right this moment, and there's a crystal skull on the Aztec calendar stone. So the crystal skull definitely figures in importantly in Mesoamerica, but this story about the 13 skulls and the winter solstice of 2012, that's just modern
propaganda,
modern fabrication. That's all.
Right. Okay. I want to thank you for clearing that up. Now, also, I was going to mention, I show we've got about 6 minutes remaining. So is there anything you'd like to tell us about that I haven't thought cover already, or any last-minute thoughts or anything like that?
Well, I'm very grateful for the opportunity, Royce, of discussing these things with you. And I think that I don't want people to get the wrong impression, that I'm against archaeologists at all. I have a great deal of respect for them. And I think that the future of archaeology is going to be a combination of both the mainstream archaeologists, who do very close-up subjective work, and cultural diffusionists like myself, who stand back and try to look at an object more objectively. So it's a combination of both. And I think that that's where archaeology, I think, is headed. And that what we're talking about doesn't belong only to archaeologists. This is your heritage and it's mine. It's our legacy from the past. That American prehistory goes back, it's far more rich than we're led to believe. It's far more important and far more interesting. And that the more people are aware of their past and have pride in their past, they have greater pride in their country. And that's why history is very deeply important.
Well, for me, it's also important that it be accurate, because then, anything that's not true is illusionary, and you're believing a lie. You're believing an illusion. You're not believing what really happened. You're believing what somebody said happened.
Absolutely, and I think that the belief systems that they have now are agendas, that they want people to think in a specific way. They want people to believe specific things rather than coming to their own conclusions. And that's what we're asking in the book that we've come out with, The Lost Worlds of Ancient America. We want the reader to come to his or her own conclusions. We're not trying to force ideas down their throat, like unfortunately too many mainstream archaeologists are insistent that there were no contacts in America before Columbus, and we're showing that there were abundant contacts.
Yeah, and I want to tell the listeners right quick, because I read this book myself personally, that we really did not even scratch the surface of the proof of the different artifacts that's been dug up in America, all across America. This is really some very, very extremely extensive research. To be honest with you, we've only had an hour show today. I don't think we could have covered the whole thing in 2 hours. I do honestly believe this is a great research tool, something to rely on, to fall back on, remind you what areas you can look things up in, and it would give you great ideas of things that you might ask or not answered directly in the book itself. And I would highly recommend this book to anybody. It's very educational, and it's definitely very thought-provoking.
Well, thank you very much, Royce. That's all I can hope for, is that people begin to use their imagination and their intelligence and think for themselves. I'm very grateful for your kind words.
Well, I'm very grateful to you for coming on the show and spending this hour with me and sharing this here with my listeners. I definitely hope to have you back again in the future, especially since I feel quite sure you're going to be doing more work and learning, more stuff that we don't know. New things come up every day, and, always got to have fresh content or, for your listeners so that they will grow and learn. They don't stagnate, in other words.
Right. Well, I'm sure we'll do it again, and I certainly will keep in touch and let you know what's going on.
Thank you, Frank. I really do appreciate that. And it's been a fantastic hour, and I'll be in touch with you over the next few days about those links that I mentioned. And I want to thank you very much for coming, and you have a very good weekend. You too, Royce. I hope you do, and I hope the skies are clear where you are. And I hope they're clear where you're at. I know they're clear here. But it's hot here, too. Oh, well. Okay. Thanks a lot, Royce. Bye-bye. Bye. Okay, everybody. I think he was a fantastic guest. I really enjoyed his book, and I would really recommend his book to anybody. Personally, folks, please forgive me. That hit me all of a sudden. What I was going to mention real quick, like before I cut the show loose, was our next show, and I need to pull open my schedule here, which I did not have the foresight to do today like I usually do. And let me scroll down to it here. We're going to have, let's see, David Weatherly, Nancy Maher. Next, we're going to have Debbie Malone this Tuesday at 8 p.m. I also want to apologize for last Tuesday when I was supposed to be on with William Gleason, Beyond the Illusion. That was my fault. I was not well, and I was not able to make the show, and I will be returning the favor. Don't forget, if y'all want to buy Frank's book, there's a link to it underneath his show description down there. I didn't get all of his books on there, but there is his most recent one down there. And I hope to see you guys back in the very near future for Debbie Malone. She's a psychic detective who solved crimes, and, you know, she's going to share some of her work with us. And we got some other interesting stuff coming up in the near future. I also want to remind everybody to go to UFO Today, World UFO Today Network to celebrate UFO Day, July 2nd, which is coming up in the very near future. I also want to remind everybody to visit my friends at, one of these friends I'm not going to mention. I need to take their banner down. I'm just waiting to see if they get their site back up first or not. Alien UFO Community has been down. It's a Ning site. It looks like they weren't able to make their payments to keep it up, but I don't want to actually remove this just yet in case they're able to get it back up and running. I just actually X'd out of the wrong page by accident. So I would not advise going by there for a little while to see if they get a chance to get it back up. However, I would still go to the Supernatural UFO forums, and they've got a really fantastic board there and some really friendly people. And I would recommend going to United Paranormal International. Also, for those of you that enjoy radio, that enjoy my show, or any show, you might also enjoy Gary Brown's show, UKPN Radio. If you click on my radio show's link, you'll see his banner at the very top. Actually, that's Radio Favorites. And you just click on that banner to take you right to it. There's JimHarold.com, and that's also linked. The Gralien Report with my friend Micah Hanks, and that's also linked. And then there's Ohio Exopolitics Radio with my friend Mark Snyder. I would recommend any one of those shows. I think you'll really enjoy them. They're very educational. And I'm going to call that a wrap. And look for this over at YouTube and in my archives here over the next couple of days. And y'all have a great day. Thank you very much. Oh, and I want to thank all of y'all for coming. I almost forgot. I couldn't have a show without my listeners any more than I could have a show without my guest. So y'all, thank y'all very much, and I hope to see y'all this Tuesday at 8 p.m. when I interview Debbie Malone at Central Standard Time. Thanks.